have everybody's attention? We're going to get started, and I've been told that this session, which was, hi, can everybody hear me in the back? Good. This is, instead of the 1.25 hour, we're going to keep this session to 1 hour so we can keep everything sort of on pace. So I'm going to welcome everybody to this session entitled Local Housing Affordability and the District's Fiscal Year 2026 Budget. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, I don't think my mic is working. We've started, dude. So, yeah, exactly. Just keep charging ahead. So, both, as I started out the first panel saying, both the federal and DC budget have been in the news like for a year now for the next budget. We've had unprecedented reductions in the federal workforce impacting the district's economy, therefore tax base. We've had shifting revenue projections. We've had the White House's tax reduction bill enacted in July. The FY26 budget proposal by the feds having huge impacts, as discussed in the last session, on rental housing programs in the district, of course, and nationally. Fortunately, we have three expert panelists to help us sort out how all this impacts you and DC renters generally. To say a word about logistics, we have 1 hour for this session. Each panelist will have about 10 to 12 minutes to present. We'll have a little time for follow-up in case any panelists have any follow-up comment they want to make on somebody else's presentation. And then we'll save as much time as possible for your questions. I do not have my sheet, but by way of reintroduction, Sean Cudahy is the Deputy Committee Director for the Committee on Housing. I'm okay, Sean, okay. But thanks. And chaired by Councilmember Robert White, at-large council member. And then we will have Michael Cohen, who is with the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and I believe you're housing chief, czar, yes. What are you? Housing czar. King of housing, that's it. And then the emperor of housing for the coalition, Maya Braden. So we have another great panel to talk about the budget, this time on the district level, and we'll start with Sean.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Jobs. I have...
For those of you who weren't paying attention.
Yeah. I told my default, if I'm in a hurry, like on a Saturday morning when I have an event first thing, my default is just put on all black, and I went overboard today. I have been a housing policy staffer for a little over 2 years now, which means I'm behind the curve relative to a lot of you experts in this room, folks who, whether it's because your full-time job or because you just need to be a housing policy expert in DC to get through your week. So it's a real privilege to be on this panel today, to be invited by OTA, and to be speaking with all of you. I'm going to try and keep this pretty brisk so that there's plenty of time for Q&A. But OTA has asked me to give some context around how we get to each year's budget for the district government. And I'm going to adopt Noel's rule from the last panel. Feel free to shout at any time, what does that mean? I'll also say a member of the audience walked up before this panel and asked me to remind everybody to please silence your devices. So I'm ready to start looking at some slides. Okay, so again, Sean Cudahy, you're great, Joel, thank you. I am on the Housing Committee team. So the DC Council is our legislative body in DC. And one of the council's responsibilities is to take the budget proposal that the mayor sends every year and make adjustments and finalize it. I've put on this first slide some just basic context about how housing investments fit into a typical operating budget for a typical fiscal year. So I've put little boxes around a couple of the biggest budget departments that are relevant to housing, where you can see the Department of Human Services, let me not blind Joel, and the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. Medicaid makes up a huge share of the local budget every year. Our schools. Joel, are these slides going to be available? Well, it's not that important. They're not great slides, but there you go.
The answer is they're great, and yes, they'll do it.
Okay, the slides will be available. And more importantly, Joey from OTA has put together a handout that I think captures some of the key investments going into next fiscal year, which starts on October 1st. So please take a close look at that, because these are some of the most important local housing investments in the housing system. So, as I mentioned, the Home Rule Act, which lays out the respective responsibilities of the mayor, the council, the courts, says in it that the council gets to say, Mayor, send us a budget proposal by X date every year. And then the Home Rule Act, which is an act of Congress that we don't have the power to change, says that the council has exactly 10 weeks to figure out what the final budget is going to be. And the way we get there is that the council, which is made up of 13 members, also has committees that have different agencies of the DC government assigned to them. And so each committee holds a series of hearings regarding the agencies in its jurisdiction, and then marks up a report, holds a vote of the committee on a report saying, okay, the mayor said this many million for this agency and that many million for that agency. We're going to make some adjustments. We're going to move things around. One thing that the council has to do and the mayor has to do that Congress doesn't hold itself to is to pass a balanced budget every year. So Congress has ordered DC, I think this was coming out of the financial receivership crisis, Congress has ordered DC to make sure that over the 4-year financial plan, we're not spending more than we have. And the CFO plays a large role in making sure that's the case. So the mayor has to present a proposal where, expenditures don't exceed revenues over a 4-year plan. The council as a whole has to make adjustments that still fit within that rule. And the committee stage of the council's budget formulation process also is subject to that rule. So, for example, in Councilmember White's office, we can pull from the Department of Housing and Community Development and put things toward the DC Housing Authority, but we can't pull from the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection because that's Councilmember Nadeau's responsibility. And then we come back and Chairman Mendelson and his team take all of the different recommendations from the different committees and turn them into one comprehensive, balanced proposal. And it's a lot of work for our partners in the budget office to get done within 10 weeks every year. So they are incredible, hardworking experts, and we're lucky to work with them. Let's see. And then, like every DC bill, unlike every state, whatever the council decides to do with the budget goes to Congress. Congress has 30 legislative days where they can step in and overrule whatever we do. And you heard Noel talk about CRs, continuing resolutions, where if Congress can't get its act together and pass a fiscal year budget for the federal government, they can just do like sort of a stopgap decision to keep funding at the same level for the whole federal government that it was the year before. You probably saw that halfway through fiscal year 25, which we're in the middle of we're coming up on the end of right now, Congress decided we are not only going to make all of the federal agencies stay at fiscal year 2024 levels, we're also going to make we're going to make the district government go back to 2024 levels halfway through 2025. So, DC government, you've already been spending, based on an assumption that you're going to get to spend $21 billion in all of these categories. It's actually got to go back to 20, and you only have 6 months left in the year to make all those cuts. It was a huge wrench in the works. It held up the process enormously. We also were facing some pretty dire predictions about the national economy, and then the way that some of the Trump administration's moves with respect to the federal workforce are undermining sources of funding that the DC government uses for all manner of programs, including housing programs. So you'll see on the screen some excerpts from our CFO's cover letter when we first got their budget proposal, basically saying we're in a world of hurt, and council members took this as took this to heart and decided that this year we would not see a lot of new investments in basically any part of the district government. We just did not think that the resources were going to be there absent major tax increases. There was a proposal toward the end of this year's budget process to do minor tax increases, and even that, there was not the political consensus that tax increases should happen in a significant way going into fiscal year 2026. So you've got OTA's summary of where we have landed going into next fiscal year in front of you. That is the context of how we got there, and I will go ahead and pass it to, let me just make sure I didn't put anything else important in these slides. Okay, this is a lot of overlapping information with what OTA has already provided in the handout, so I'll leave it there and turn it over to Michael.
Hey, y'all. I will be taking over to talk a little bit about both the emergency housing system as well as what happened with housing vouchers in DC. Oh, thank you. My slides are also not that good, so I'm not going to worry about that. To talk to you about the emergency housing system as well as the what happened with vouchers for the FY26 budget. So thinking about the affordable housing system overall, it's a system. System has multiple parts that all work together. And so I'll be talking about what happens in the emergency system when, for instance, you have an unexpected cut to your hours at work and you can't make your rent. What are your resources and what happened with those programs? As well as talking about vouchers, which are longer term, deeper subsidy for households. So thinking about, first with the emergency housing system, the major program that exists in DC for support when you're unable to make your rent for an emergency reason is ERAP, which stands for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So that is the major source for folks if they are struggling to pay their rent. And with ERAP, there's sort of, I think, three key takeaways that I want to leave you with for what's happening with ERAP in this upcoming year. The first were there are some changes to how the program works that I'll talk about a little bit more in depth that have made it harder to be eligible and have reduced the tenant protections associated with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The second thing I'll talk about is that we expect there to be an increase in need for reasons that you might be able to expect, involving federal government jobs, involving what's happening with ICE raids in our city. There are a lot of reasons that we expect the need for housing assistance to be, emergency housing assistance to go up. And the third thing that I'll talk about is a sort of overall reduction in the funding available for emergency rental assistance in the city, due in part to some of the fiscal issues that Sean talked about. So the first thing that I will say in terms of what changed with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So to do that, we need a little bit of background. I don't know if you all knew, we are in a housing crisis in the city. Part of that housing crisis involves a high level of rental arrears. Basically, a large number of folks are behind on their rent, which causes a lot of cascading issues. There are a few reasons why that is the case. I think the most obvious, you might be able to guess, rents are going up. Folks' income is not keeping pace with rents, therefore people are struggling to be able to pay. The other thing that is sort of, that has come up and that has been offered as a potential issue is the emergency rental assistance program. So there has been an argument that the way that the program is structured incentivizes non-payment of rent. I won't go into, I have some questions about whether ERAP is the actual cause of that. I won't go into them, but essentially what has happened is that the program was changed in this past year to essentially make it harder. It's a little bit harder to be eligible for emergency rental assistance. So formerly, you need, before these changes, you could have an emergency come up that maybe you were able to anticipate. And you saw them, you had an emergency come up and you could apply for emergency rental assistance program. With these changes, in order to qualify, the emergency has to be something that was completely unforeseen. So it has to be something that you could not have anticipated in any way, which we expect will make fewer people eligible for the program. The other thing that was changed to make eligibility a little bit more narrow is that formerly you could, the rules around certification to confirm that you were eligible were a little bit looser. So if you had maybe informal documents, it was easier to use the sort of justification and the paperwork needed to apply was made a little bit more stringent. So all those things mean that applying for emergency rental assistance is going to be more difficult in this coming year. And so the second thing that I will talk about a little bit is the sort of increased need that we expect for emergency rental assistance. So given what is happening at the federal level in terms of a lot of folks losing their jobs due to cuts, to federal cuts, as well as things like a lot of folks potentially losing a contributing member of their household due to the ICE raids that we see happening, there's a sort of expectation that a lot more folks will be facing these kind of emergency conditions that will lead them to need emergency rental assistance. And sort of that takes me to the third piece, which is the funding amounts. So last year, the emergency rental assistance program was funded at $26.9 million. Sounds like a lot of money. Does anyone shout out? Does anyone know how long the portal was to apply for emergency rentals? Yeah, less than an hour is close. It closed same day. The portal opened and the portal closed that exact same day. So that was with $26.9 million. So what that tells us is that folks are in dire need of these funds. Unfortunately, with the FY26 budget, the original funding level that the mayor put in for the emergency rental assistance program was $5 million. So you don't have to be a math expert to know that $5 million is a lot less than 26.9. Throughout the budget process, the council, I will give them the credit where credit is due. They reached deep into their pockets in a very tough year in order to raise the funding level up to 11.6 million with the potential for more funding available, 2.9 million. So better than 5 million, but still a great deal less than 26.9 from last year, which itself was a cut from the year prior. So all that means is that in this year where you've heard about some of the federal challenges, you've heard about some of the challenges with DC's budget, there's going to be fewer funds available for folks who experience these emergencies with their rent, fewer sort of emergency sources of funding for folks to be able to use. Particularly in this moment where there was a question earlier in the earlier panel about the response to homelessness, folks being imprisoned for being on the street. We're going to need these resources more than ever, and these resources, not having them and having folks face housing instability is more dangerous than it's ever been. So I think it'll be important, something to keep in your advocacy moving forward around emergency rental assistance. The second thing that I'll talk about is the second part of that housing system that I mentioned that I'll go through is tenant-based housing vouchers. If you look at this super handy handout that OTA has, it mentions local rent supplement program housing vouchers. So our voucher system sort of has two main sources. There's the Housing Choice Voucher, which is funded at the federal level, and DC implements that program, but the funding comes from the feds. The other type of housing voucher, and so DC also has a local program called the Local Rent Supplement Program. Works pretty similar to the Housing Choice Voucher, funded through local dollars. And so that program, we sort of heard in the prior panel about the federal housing vouchers being potentially at risk in terms of potentially flat funding, which would represent a cut. We sort of expect there to be potential challenges with continuing funding for those federal vouchers. At the local level, the council added to the local rent supplement program, they added project and sponsor-based vouchers. And so I think Maya will talk a little bit more about that, but those vouchers go to a housing provider in order to make a unit in their building affordable. In terms of tenant-based vouchers, the funding at the DC's local funding was essentially flat. So there are no new sort of tenant-based local rent supplement program vouchers. Similar to what I said before, given what we expect in terms of folks losing their jobs, there being increased housing need, that sort of funding for folks through the local rent supplement program is going to be really important to give folks more access to affordable housing. So I'll pause there and pass it off to my colleague to talk about subsidized housing.
Thanks a ton, Michael. And I just want to give a shout out to the video folks, because this room has these giant pillars, and I just feel like I wish I could see you all behind the pillars, but I am glad that you can see me, even if I can't see you. So I appreciate that a lot. My name is Maya. I'm here with the coalition, formerly known as CNHED. I've got some slides going, but basically what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit about what our advocacy and our partnerships, including with many of the folks in this room, have been able to achieve this year, and what we're trying to do to make sure that DC and our people have a place now and have a bright future, despite the fact that we often face budgets that are not sufficient to meet the documented known needs. So first, kind of who is the coalition? Depending on the day and where we are on any particular issue, somebody's going to call us a group for housing developers, somebody's going to call us a tenant advocate group, somebody's going to call us a small business group. The honest answer is we are all of the above. We are a coalition that recognizes that we need jobs and employers and rental housing and the people who live in rental housing to be able to be a great, beautiful, functioning DC. So we do a lot of different types of work around policy advocacy, around helping things on all kind of different spaces in this ecosystem. But our core value here is that we need to collaborate to get anything done. So we do a lot of work around TOPA, because TOPA is about collaborative development and knowing that the residents of a building and the people buying the building really need to be in communication to create a great building and sustain it over time. We do also a lot of work when we're thinking about things like emergency rental assistance and eviction processes to know that the sorts of problems that happen in a building also are all better solved with communication, collaboration, trying to figure out how we make beautiful communities for all of us together. So another little piece of background before I talk really about the DC budget here is that when we think about housing programs, we think about them in terms of both our future and our today. So when we're looking at what do we want to do about housing and where are we going to be fighting for housing budgets or for housing changes or for programs to be working better, we're thinking about people's economic mobility for your kids, for yourself, for your grandkids, for the people that you love in your community. Is housing helping you be able to get ahead, or is it holding you back? We're also thinking about health and stability and what we need right now and today to be able to just survive to the next day. And so we have a variety of different things that you'll be able to see on this slide and think through as you know, if you look at the slides later, that are really about how we make sure that this broad system of housing that includes so many different letters and initials and like 3 different programs or multiple agencies and just confusing as all heck, that like we actually figure out what are we trying to really get out of this. And what we're trying to get out of this is health and stability through things that relate to making sure that repairs are there and making sure that people can afford their rent on a day-to-day basis, but also economic mobility, making sure that, you know, if you're paying your rent on time, you could have that benefit your credit in the future, that there's programs that help people who want to move from renting to ownership, and that there are programs that make sure that if you're getting ahead, it's not all being kind of pulled out back from under you underneath. Now I'm going to get into the DC budget pieces. This chart, I'm going to tell you straight up, is as simplified as a mega tracker chart we could do, but it is confusing and complicated. So I'm going to try to break it down a little bit more. Basically, the coalition has been doing advocacy in DC around the budget for a really long time, and we like to track where have we been in the past on different programs, where are we in the future on programs, what did we ask for this past year, which is in yellow, what did the mayor ask for this past year, which is the one that starts with blue on the top, and what actually got passed and approved at the end of the process, which has green on the top. I am very grateful to so many of the people in this room and so many tenants and advocates all across DC that the numbers in green are often pretty close to the numbers that we asked for in yellow, and they definitely got better than the initial budget. I'm also grateful, just, you know, again, credit where credit is due, that the numbers in blue are trying to do a whole heck of a lot. The mayor's budget was trying to do a whole heck of a lot with not a lot available because we do have this balanced budget requirement. So when we think about where we are here, we've got programs that are really about the future. And that includes the Housing Production Trust Fund, because when we put $100 million every year, as the mayor has typically done, into the Housing Production Trust Fund, we don't see that this year, today. We see that in the future. But we also have money that the council hard fought, and as Michael described, hard fought continued, despite the fact that it is still nowhere near enough. The money in the Emergency Rental Assistance Program that does help people avoid an eviction today and helps the housing providers who need that money to be able to go back to put into repairs and operations have that money as well. Because that chart is so wild, I decided to break it down even further and just say, we don't need to talk about every single program. When we hear from folks at our coalition advocacy days, what do we want? People say, I want to know what's happening on housing. I want to know what's happening on jobs. I want to know, you know, are there going to be vouchers? What do we got? DC's budget for any of the agencies that you go to, part of it comes from the federal stuff you may have heard about at the last panel, and part of it comes from the local stuff. I'm here really emphasizing the local stuff, but we need this partnership between the two resources. When the federal government cuts or threatens to cut funding around public housing, it makes DC decide we're going to have to take some of our own money, as many council members have done, including council member Robert White's office, to put money in to say, we need some more money for public housing repairs because the federal government has been failing on funding that, and other ways that we try to build a little bit more here. But if you see on the immediate needs side of the chart, when we put money into the emergency rent assistance program, as we have successfully fought to increase, but still have never gotten to where it fully needs to be, that means people stay housed this year. So we are very glad that there's some more money beyond what was initially proposed. Permanent supportive housing also makes sure that folks who have deep support needs, not just paying the rent, but making sure that they have the tools. And I think of the supportive needs as more like a life coach that helps you get through your stuff and helps connect you to other things, that you can have that money, when we put it into there, helps people move from the street or the shelter into housing with those sorts of supports. This year, we were not able to get any increased money for individuals in that situation, but we're able to get some increased money for families who needed that sort of permanent support. The DC Preservation Fund, the Housing Preservation Fund on there, if you go to the list and you look at it, you'll see it says that we asked for nothing in it and we got nothing in it. That is a weird anomaly in the way that this program is funded. It is a recurring fund. It needed money to be put into it in the past, which gets paid back and then recycles. So the folks who are doing the work of recycling that money for housing preservation, stuff that often goes to a TOPA transaction, for example, they received the money in the past. It's groups like LISC, groups like the Housing Preservation, totally blanking on the names of entities in here, Capital Impact Partners, et cetera. They said, listen, we have enough money to be able to give out this year based on what was repaid in the past, so we don't need new money in it. We just need to be able to make sure that there's enough money in the Housing Production Trust Fund so that people can actually convert to permanent and repay. But that money in preservation also helps today when a property is about to be sold and folks need those resources for a TOPA transaction, or when a property needs to be refinanced. We also think about the home purchase programs we fight for, including HPAP and EHAP, as ways to help people today. One of the things that we were really glad happened in the budget this year was that we effectively managed to get those resources to go back to a rolling, recurring, first-come, first-served basis, as opposed to a lottery where you may have gone through all the work of trying to get yourself to a home that you could buy, and then all of a sudden find out that the down payment assistance that you were relying on wasn't actually there for you, even though you had gotten in line to get it. But if all we work for is this immediate need stuff, we don't get anywhere else in the future than meeting more immediate needs over and over and over again. So we also need to make sure that as part of this, like how the system collaborates together, that we're asking for money in the Housing Production Trust Fund that gets money to build new affordable housing with a variety of affordability restrictions on there. That those funds mean that our kids and grandkids will also be able to find an affordable place to live in DC. And then the local rent supplement program, I put as a long-term resource because the way that most of the money works, in especially that project-based and sponsor-based local rent supplement, is not exactly the same as the housing choice voucher that it's modeled after. A lot of the stuff about how you, like what you get in terms of depth of affordability is the same, but what happens is it gets attached to a building so that that building will have units that are at the affordability level that you could get out of public housing. But the funds are not immediate this year, usually, going to make housing more affordable to somebody. But when those Housing Production Trust Fund units get built and start to lease up, units in them become more affordable in a really deep way when we have the local rent supplement program functioning. So this is why we advocate, especially as our biggest priority, some of these programs, because it feels like the things that when we hear from folks, what do we need? It's, I need help now. And I need to know that the future is going to still be bright for me and my kids and my grandkids and the other people that I care about in my community. And there are still huge gaps. And I will also note that, as Steve mentioned on the last panel, DC, even as hard as it is to look around and think that we are fortunate compared with other cities in a moment where every day just seems like, whew, how are we getting through? No other place has something like a local rent supplement program, and no other place puts money into a housing production trust fund like this, and very few places put money into emergency rent assistance at the levels that we have. So your advocacy has really been effective, even when it feels like we need more. And we do, in fact, need more of your advocacy, but you have really made a huge, huge difference so far. The last thing that I want to share here is just bringing it all the way back to the fact that the stuff we're talking about here in terms of housing, you know, it's all part of a system, interconnected. What we're trying to get is a DC where the people that we love and care for are stable and well and supported, and we're looking for well-being and equity in DC. And the ways that we get that are through enough jobs and job programs and job training and education supports to be able to make sure that people can get their incomes up and their kids' incomes up and really dream in that future way, but also on the housing side. And if we fail to do enough on the housing side to make housing costs low, and if we fail to do enough on the job side to make jobs available and the skills available for our DC workers, everything in these gears just shut down. So I really appreciate everything that all the folks around here have done and continue to try to do, and that's part of why at the coalition our work includes tenant work, includes affordable housing industry work, includes small business and workforce development and economic development work, because we're trying to get it all to come together there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maya. All great presentations, so thanks to all the panelists. We have, I think, 17 minutes for questions. I do want to ask if any of the panelists want to follow up on a point made by another panelist or any further comments before we go to questions. The answer can be no.
I'll do one quick follow-up, which is out in the hall along the service corridor of folks that you should talk to. If you have questions about how to work with emergency rent assistance program that Michael brought up, Housing Counseling Services is a great group to be able to talk to. They have really worked on trying to figure out how they can meet the rules of the program going forward in ways that honor that documentation comes in a variety of different ways.
Okay, great. And I'll encourage folks, I think we have a number of questions from the previous session that are very relevant here, so thanks for those questions. We're going to ask them, and I'll still encourage folks to write any further questions on an index card and send it to the end of the row. And we can maybe get in some more questions. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, I think, for both Michael and Maya, but Sean might have something to say there too. The question is the future of public housing and the trust fund, and what is included in the 3-year plan. I'm not sure what there's a 4-year projection by the for a fiscal plan by the district as a whole, but I'll let you answer any way you want, starting with Maya or Michael, or
So I just want to make sure that I have a good sense of what we're hearing here. It's both about DC's public housing developments and about the future on the Housing Production Trust Fund. Is that effective?
If you want to
Effectively
handle it that way, I was seeing it as a DC question for public housing and the trust fund, but whoever asked the question knows
Yeah.
better.
Is that a fair? Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So the Housing Production Trust Fund money has a couple of different things it can be used for, and some of it can sometimes be necessary for revitalizing public housing. So the Housing Production Trust Fund is like anything production and preservation, and the last year it was also used for stabilizing properties where like a whole apartment building would potentially face a risk of foreclosure, leaving everybody in a really bad situation. So when we think about the Housing Production Trust Fund to public housing, number one is making sure that DHCD hears that we need Housing Production Trust Fund money to go towards preserving the housing we have, including reinvesting in the repairs we need at public housing or in low-income housing tax credit projects or in other projects like that. On the public housing side, it's hard, though, because public housing sometimes gets repaired by the housing authority with their own funds or with public housing repair funds, but they sometimes convert it to private housing with other subsidy programs attached. So if public housing gets converted to private, there are ways through DC's resources for Housing Production Trust Fund to make sure that it stays affordable in the future and gets money for repairs. So I guess the added bit of answer there is look at the particular building you're concerned about on public housing. Go talk to the folks at the DCHA table outside and say, is this on your revitalization plan? Is this staying public housing or shifting? And then you have a sense of whether you need to be asking the DHCD to have it be a priority for the trust fund money, or DCHA to have it be a priority for the public housing money. Is there anything else you would?
So Ms. Evans, yeah. So if I'm thinking about the right investments that you're talking about, DCHA actually just worked with DEMPED to do to do an unusual financing structure outside of the Housing Production Trust Fund. They may apply for HBTF dollars in some future cycle, but they're using a financing structure called industrial revenue bonds. It's not something that the DC Housing Authority has used before. They're managing to borrow $700 million to invest in a set of public housing properties. I don't remember whether Stoddard was on the list. And the thing about bonds is that is money that you have to repay, and so the property has to start making more money than you spend on it over time. And so I think these bond finance projects, I think the goal is that they will become mixed finance projects. So they will not rely exclusively anymore on these federal subsidies that are inadequate to keep buildings up to proper condition. They will have a mix of people who need a discount on their rent and people who can pay the full cost out of their pocket based on their income, maybe a little bit more. The challenges with that is that these properties will be partly privately managed. You need private investors to come in, and so the protections that are available to to the low-income residents in traditional public housing, they are somewhat less strong in these redeveloped properties. So it's complicated. It varies a lot depending on which different federal program you use. So if the DC Housing Authority is not providing enough communication about what they're planning to do at your community or ones that you're interested in moving to, that's kind of been a problem for a long time. We have been pressuring them to be more communicative with residents, but there is always a role for more demands to DCHA saying, like, what is the timetable? What will my rights be? When is the next meeting? So keep it up.
This might be a follow-up question to what Sean just said, and I'm not sure if Ms. Evans posed this, but what are the blockers to using DC HPTF more like some
Housing Opportunities Commission.
Montgomery County in a more leveraged way to create even more public housing? I think you're kind of speaking to that, but briefly, and if anybody else has comments, briefly.
This feels like it's partly about how the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County has an ability to attach a public housing unit into a new building. So one of the ways that Montgomery County ends up adding public housing units in a very mixed income way is that their inclusionary zoning law allows some of those inclusionary zoning units to be bought by their housing authority, the Housing Opportunities Commission, to become scattered site public housing. DCHA has the right in our law to buy some inclusionary zoning units to resell them through something like the voucher home ownership program to eligible folks. It has not really been something that has been as active here, and many folks feel like, that's actually a really good way to get some deep affordability. It's not been our approach, and I think it's one that is worth conversation to try to figure out, do we want to take that approach or take our local rent supplement program approach to getting some deep affordability in mixed income communities?
One distinction between the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County and what we have in DC is that the HOC in Montgomery County is both a public housing authority that owns a lot of property and a housing finance agency with deep expertise in structuring all these financing arrangements. We have each of those pieces in different parts of the DC government, but we don't have one entity in DC that both is going to hold control of the fund and sort of loan it to itself for low-cost construction financing and make it back. So we've been talking with the Housing Finance Agency. They don't seem to think that they can really trust that they're going to get their investment back from investing in public housing at the DC Housing Authority, the same way that HOC in Montgomery County can kind of control every stage of the process and be really confident that it will actually function as a revolving loan fund.
Great. Okay. We have a lot of questions actually about advocacy, and so I'll direct this to all three, but maybe Sean first. They have slightly different angles. Attendees asking if how can residents fight back peacefully or testify? That's a good question. And if let's see, can you speak as to how to make advocacy effective? Sometimes it feels like screaming into the void. And then also, how can young people become advocates for others?
I hear you on the feeling of screaming into the void. I promise that even when the policy result that comes out of the council is not what tenants have asked for, it would have been even less like what tenants want had that advocacy not been in the mix, which is probably not a very satisfying answer. But I just want to say, I beg everybody in this room not to get discouraged. We at the council hear very regularly from amazing organizations inside and outside of government who focus on tenants' rights. And we hear very regularly from people whose full-time job it is to make it easier for the housing system to make money for people who invest in it, people who have a lot of money already. It is, and so, like, for example, there is a big vote on the Rental Act this Wednesday. There are a couple live issues where I expect to see amendments around TOPA rights. Councilmember Robert White's office is not going to move away from the position that that we took at the first vote a couple months ago around a new exemption for new buildings for the first 15 years. Councilmember White's position is that that's important for bringing in private investors. Councilmember White's not going to move an amendment around the level of affordability you need to promise to offer tenants in order to sort of do a shortcut around TOPA and qualify for a new exemption. But I can promise you that that the developer lobby is going to keep advocating really strongly between now and Wednesday for more of these sorts of policy changes that they are persuasively arguing will make it easier for them to participate in the system and make back a profit. Council members are going to keep hearing from a range of advocates. The mayor is going to keep hearing from a range of advocates, and so even if you don't see a path from now to a different outcome that you want on Wednesday, it's important that you stay in the mix to make sure that nobody takes for granted that the other side is going to win, and see even more motion away from the position that you want.
Just to follow up on that, I want to offer a couple sort of concrete opportunities for folks to plug in. The Rental Act has been brought up a few times, as folks mentioned. The vote is on the 17th. This coming Monday, there is going to be a group of tenants doing walkarounds, and essentially that will just be folks meeting at the council building and then talking to each council member, letting them know that, TOPA is something that we care about. It's important for tenants, and we want to protect folks' access to those rights. If you want even more information, feel free to come up and see me, and I'll send you the flyer. The other thing that I just to kind of add into that, I think it's really important for this, we're in a season of, it's tough to feel like your voice matters, particularly in this moment. And I think with advocacy around housing, or with the council, making sure that your voice is heard, throughout the season. There's this vote coming up, but making sure that the council members also know that you're keeping track of, are folks supporting tenants? How are they voting? And holding them accountable to the things that they're saying and delivering actual results, actual support and help for tenants. I think it's really easy to sort of, the rhetoric, no one wants to be anti-tenant, but are folks' actual work, is their output lining up with that rhetoric? And I think holding folks accountable to that is really important.
And then a last thing about advocacy. Raise your hand if you live in DC and are in this room. You have 6 council members that you specifically vote for. And do you know how many council members it takes to pass something on almost everything? 7. So if we partner with each other across wards, and if we speak to all 6 of our individual representatives, so your 6 are the chairman, the 4 at-large members, so that's Robert White, that's Kenyon McDuffie, that's Christina Henderson, and that's Anita Bonds, and then your 6th member is the one for your specific ward that you live in. So on every single issue that you care about, you've got 6 people who you should say, I am your constituent, and I can vote for or against you next time, and you want to hear from your constituents. And if people from at least 2 wards do that and reach those 5 that are in common, and that 6th one that is our ward member, then all of a sudden you've got 7. So if we just think about, I'm going to call the person that I think is the chair of this committee, or I'm going to call the person from my ward, we are missing votes that we need.
Thank you, Maya. Sean really wants to get a word in edgewise, so you have one word.
Well, in addition to our 13 council members, there is the elected AG, and there's the mayor, who directly hires and pays and can fire the people who run a lot of these programs. So on policy change at the council, yes, you have those people, and also, make sure you're talking directly to the executive branch if an existing program is not working the way you want.
And I'll say one word about the TOPA debate that's going on, which is there is the 15-year exemption for new construction is 15 years. The new construction exemption that Sean just mentioned is 15 years prospectively. There's also a 15-year retroactivity to the exemption, and I know that is something that's being discussed at the council. So I'm pointing out a possible area for wiggle room. Not sure. So the last thing on TOPA is we think that the question is, what services or programs do you offer for tenants going through the TOPA process that are interested in purchasing the building they live in? And that goes to a question we've discussed with the committee about funding in the budget for the TOPA fund, which funds CBOs, community-based organizations, who assist tenants to organize and get them through the purchase process.
I keep muting myself. Yes. The Housing Production Trust Fund includes, there are a couple different budget line items. One is sort of a general purpose line item. One is labeled TOPA/critical repairs. And so if I'm not mistaken, DHCD is allowed to use some of that second line item for grant funding for some of these organizations that provide support services to tenants. I will also say the Rental Act pulls in the version of the Rental Act that the council will vote on Wednesday, pulls in language that Councilmember Nadeau and her team developed based on the coalition's report from a couple years ago, standing up a category of sort of district-blessed tenant support providers. And so there are a couple mechanisms in the bill that would help tenants identify which groups are already doing this this kind of support work.
Okay, and this is going to be a lightning round question. I am going to ask the gentle lady to ask a question. You, because you had your hand up before. But if you can, that's you. Do you want to go ahead? You had your hand raised again. I just wanted to be sure to acknowledge you. Yes. Do you want to ask a question? Just a quick question, please. Oh. Sean talked too long, I think.
It happened.
All right, no worries. This question is, what or who is monitoring people getting financial help with housing that are able to work? And this goes to sort of a decades-long discussion about workforce housing, I think. I would point out that many of the programs that service folks who don't work also help folks who do work. And in fact, the vast majority of an old statistic is still true of folks on housing vouchers do work. They're just underpaid. They can't pay. They're not paid enough to be able to afford their housing. So that's one comment. But does anybody have further comments about this sort of workforce housing question and the budget? And if not, that's okay. It's sort of, maybe, did I just answer it sufficiently?
I mean, you may have kind of answered. So, I mean, like,
Yeah.
There are federal efforts to try to enforce that people who receive certain types of housing assistance have work requirements beyond it. This is something that is like a way bigger than the world of this conversation about whether DC would become subject to that sort of stuff in the future or not. But basically what anybody researching has found is that almost everybody who is subject to some kind of, almost anybody who is receiving voucher assistance or public housing assistance is either already actually working, just underemployed or underpaid, or meets an exemption category due to some level of disability. So like add them or not, all it is a pain in the butt to do some more compliance work on. It doesn't seem to necessarily change the reality.
Yeah, I would just add really quickly. I think the sort of broader sense that only folks who are working or doing something deserve housing support is a kind of it's a divisive idea that I think we should reject. That everyone deserves safe, clean, affordable housing. That's something that we should be looking to provide for everyone.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. So I'm going to close this out by thanking the panelists. Wonderful presentations, and so please help me thank them for being here and sharing their insights. I'm actually going to answer the last question right now myself. The question is how to find out who your owner-operator of your property is. Well, stay tuned for the lunch and afterwards, because in the afternoon we're going to have a tenant detective. I almost said tenant defective, but it's housing provider defective, tenant detective session, and what that's aimed at is educating folks about the publicly available information about your landlord and about the property you live in. So that's going to be a really valuable session. I hope everybody stays. Yes, ma'am. Can you say very briefly what your question was? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a homelessness question, but you're right, that could be a tenant thing. The scalable. That was a good question. I'm sorry I didn't get to it. Can anybody answer that very? Okay, all right, well, we are limited. We're gonna try to answer questions that didn't get posed because we didn't have, we had to cut our program short a little bit today. But I think those are excellent questions. The scalable?
For the scalable
yes.
piece, if you have public housing choice voucher, or a local rent supplement program, or there's a couple of programs that have this sort of scalability of rent to income. There are some other programs like low-income housing tax credit, if you don't also have some other subsidy in there, that are just set at like, this is the band of what income goes with on there. And that's where the coalition tries to work for a whole continuum of approaches, because we do need more that is scaled.
And I'll just add, let me add to that we did get a couple questions about rent control. TOP is more on people's minds right now, but the committee is talking. Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't have more time for the Q&A. But I know that Councilmember White and the Housing Committee are closely looking at all sorts of tenant protections, including on affordability, potentially rent control moving forward, and the scalability question was excellent. So I'm glad that you posed it. Okay. All right, well, we're going to have to move. Thank you so much. So we do need to move on. I'm going to bring Tamala back to do the Tenant of the Year presentation, and then I hope everybody stays around for the lunch and for the afternoon programs. And thanks again to our great panelists.
Thank you, guys. Hi, so now I have the great honor of presenting one of the highlights of our summit, the Tenant of the Year Award. This year, the recipient is Miss Beatrice Evans. Miss Evans has spent years lifting up her neighbors and strengthening tenant voices across the city. She currently serves as the president of the Triangle View and Milestone Senior Community. and is also a co-founder of ETAPP, which stands for the Elder Tenant Association and Presenters, ETAPP, formed in 2022. They bring together senior buildings and mixed rental communities with a mission to empower tenants, educate one another on housing rights, and bridge the gap between residents, city leaders, services, and the broader community. I think we can all agree that Ms. Evans has mastered the art of good trouble in the best possible way. Getting things done, inspiring others, and proving that one tenant's voice can lead to lasting change for many. Please join me in congratulating and celebrating our Tenant of the Year, Ms. Beatrice Evans. Okay. We have a couple of special things for you. We have an award for you. So you want to take a picture? I think, Cristobal, you want to come over here and take it? This is pretty, isn't it? Yeah. Good job with that. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Congratulations.
Thank you. And so now we're gonna break for lunch. Lunch is right where we had breakfast. And then afterwards, we will have we have two panel discussions going on. One is mutual aid in this room, and then the tenant detective in the room right past here is another conference room area, and we're gonna have the tenant detective in that room. And then for the people that signed up for the legal clinic and the rent registry, don't forget your time slots, and remember we moved them all back 30 minutes. So if you had 1 o'clock, they're gonna see you at 1:30, and those are on the second level. There'll be somebody to guide you up, but there's steps here, and then if you need the elevator, it's right around the corner. It's starting, yes, 30 minutes. Okay. Tenant detective starts at 2:15, and so does the mutual aid panel.